All right, welcome everybody to another CFIN webinar. Today we are talking about ransomware, which is an incredibly important threat that we all need to be aware of. Now, if you aren't familiar with ransomware, you should know that it is a cybersecurity threat that affects many, many Canadian businesses. In fact, some research shows that 11% of Canadian businesses were impacted by ransomware in the past, and that many have paid an average of up to $2 million to get back into their systems. If you've seen our last webinar about cybersecurity, you know that there are many, many forms of threat that businesses, especially businesses in the food sector, need to be aware of. But today we're going right in onto this malware topic because it is so pervasive. And if you don't know what malware is, it is basically software that's deployed by a criminal group who wants to make money by preventing you from accessing your device, your data, and all the stuff you have stored within your system by encrypting your files. So these criminals, they can demand ransom in exchange for a decryption key. And this is very organized crime. This isn't some kids just sitting around playing to see what they can do and not do for mischief's sake. So to really understand this topic, my team has invited two really distinguished speakers, Dan Couillard and David Shipley. I'm going to ask them some questions, and I'm going to learn along with you today so that hopefully we can all, as executives working in the food business, protect our businesses and not end up having to flow resources to these really nefarious criminals. So thank you, Dan, and thank you, David, for being here today. I think it's best, since you both have such long and distinguished careers, for me to just ask each of you to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you come to be a cybersecurity expert. So Dan, I think I'll start with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So thank you again for inviting us to join this webinar. So Dan Couillard, I'm a senior executive with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. I've been in the cyber business. I started to get involved via CRIP, as a ex-military officer, worked with CSC, and at some point the military is a game for a young person. So at some point you move on to other career, and I think I saw cyber as definitely a growing field, and I've been doing this for over 15 years now. We're always at the Communication Security Establishment, which is our department. So I don't want to get into the way the federal government is constructed, but basically the Cyber Center is a program within the Communication Security Establishment. And I've been doing cyber for over 15 years. I've been a member of the Cyber Center since its creation 4 years ago, and I'm really happy to be here today and kind of discuss with my colleague here today on how what is ransomware and how we can bring the good words on how to deal with that real threat.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Now, what's your exact title? Because I know it sounds pretty fancy.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, if you want to get into title, so I'm the Director General of Partnership and Risk Mitigation.
Yeah, it's fancy sounding.
There you go. Which means resilience. So it's about my focus is working on raising the bar for cybersecurity in Canada, so improving resilience of the federal government and critical infrastructure in Canada.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And David Shipley, I know that you have an equally deep and rooted career in cybersecurity. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Sure. I'm an accidental cybersecurity professional. I was a Canadian Forces Army soldier, very happy doing that. Then I was a newspaper reporter, and then I ran the website for the University of New Brunswick. And on Mother's Day 2012, my life changed when a hacktivist group hacked the university, published some non-public data, and I was one of the first people to get one of their nasty little notes on that Mother's Day Sunday. And I raised the alarm to my colleagues and said, hey, I think we have a problem, and rolled up my sleeves and went to work with the IT team throughout that Sunday, doing what we now would call as incident response. And afterwards, the CIO asked me to become a cybersecurity professional within their team, and eventually led the group that responded to all kinds of crazy attacks on a university. During that time at the university, what I discovered is that cyber is more about people, process, and culture than it ever was about technology. And we found a way to actually educate and motivate people throughout an organization to know more and care more about security. And that's the journey we call the sheepdog effect, which is why my company, Beauceron, is named after a sheepdog from northern France, because that's our goal, is to turn people into those sheepdogs when it comes to cybersecurity. So it's a little bit of my background and my passion, and I'm really thrilled to be here alongside Daniel to talk about this today.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and I learned so much from the first webinar. So thank you so much. Now, Daniel, the Center for Cybersecurity is not something, it's not a household name. It's not like Health Canada or some of the other government institutions that we're very familiar with. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about how it fits into the ecosystem and you know, what you do for us as citizens and business leaders?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I know this is a bit of a daunting. Understanding how the federal government is set up is always a bit of a mystery. And in the sphere of cyber, there's so many groups involved, right? It's a whole of government response sometime, and we are one of the stakeholders. But let me try to make this more clear for our people today. So yes, so we're the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. We are an organization that's 4-year-old. That have been built to really regroup some of the various pockets of operational authority or operational activity in cyber within the federal government. And we were given a mandate that was fairly broad, which was just definitely we're at the root of our history of our work is protecting the federal government. So we're doing that. Okay. But also with the creation of the Cyber Center, we had a mandate to look after Canadian citizens, critical infrastructure, small businesses. So really a full gambit really of Canada. And the way this is happening now is at the heart of it, like I said, we're protecting the federal government. So federal government, obviously, we are the custodian of a large amount of information. Of course, a lot of information on Canadians, so massive privacy issue there. But also, we have information on intellectual property, on various activity done by various sectors in the Canadian economy, national security, lots of information about position in Canada on matter of international trade or defense. So we're a target, and we are the organization that's actually protecting the federal network. So lots of experience there. We do gain so we are an operator. So we have our own security operations center. We do, with that information, we are able to build a picture of those malicious actors on the internet. And from that, we leverage that and then try to go and inform the rest of Canada to better protect themselves. So in the space for the non-federal, our role is basically to be out there, engaging Canadian company, critical infrastructure. That's a critical, and with today's news and everything else, everybody understand how this is important. So sort of engaging them, be a champion to bring the message of how it's important to invest, what are the threats they need to face, what are the best practices that we can recommend for them to implement. So in that sphere, we're there to build community of interest, facilitate the exchange of information, do information between cross-sector. A lot of time in Canada, we have these sectors of excellence in the financial sector, the telecom industry, but facilitate also the passage of information, again, to build resilience. So the goal is to build resilience and like participating in this event like today to help people understand what cybersecurity is. And I can just echo what David said, that often we think cybersecurity being a technology-focused activity, but at the heart of it, it's a people issue, right? It's understanding the business and be able to react appropriately to defend what matters to us.
Cool. So that's really interesting, and that's a great explanation. I'm getting the sense that you lead by doing. It's like you get attacked, you learn some things, you share that with everyone else to help them to be protected and not suffer the same kind of issues, which is a very dynamic model. Now, how would ransomware and ransom attacks rate against other cybercrimes? Like, is it something that is very high on your team's list of things to worry about and to contend with?
Absolutely. So maybe let me start by quoting a document that we publish, and then I'll go from there. So,
Sure.
So every 2 years, the Cyber Center publish what we call a National Cyber Threat Assessment.
Mm-hmm.
The latest version was published last October, so just a couple months ago. And this is a document that gives you a 2-year forward outlook on what are the threats that Canada is going to face. And really, and it's on our website, and at the end, you're going to be so I highly recommend everybody go take a look at it. But there's really, at the sum of it, there's really 5 key judgments in this document. And one of the judgment is basically that ransomware and cybercrime will be the most persistent threat faced by Canadians for the next 2 years. So, of all, I mean, obviously, there's a series of other cybercrime activity that are happening. You know, there's lots of fraud. There's theft of credential, theft of private information, but ransomware rate as the most #1 threat for Canadian. Now, we mentioned, I think you mentioned 11% of Canadian business are facing ransomware, but we also know those numbers are based on it's not often reported. Like, you know.
So you think that's a low number, that there's probably more companies. Yeah, I wondered about that. And because you do see, when you do the research I did, a lot of variance, and I wondered if there was an element to that. So David, turning to you, who is vulnerable to ransomware attacks, and particularly from your perspective, like what types of food companies would be potentially more vulnerable than other types of food companies?
Absolutely. So any organization that has a high degree of sensitivity when it comes to accessing the data they need to run their organization or smooth operations of their systems is sensitive to the key crux of what makes extortion work. It's the pain that you feel for the disruption you're going through. So, you know, we think about an entire provincial healthcare system that got hit with ransomware, unable to access patient records, unable to deliver effective services. There was no X-ray, diagnostic imaging, etc. That's an extreme example. And we've seen other examples globally, the Irish healthcare system and more. You know, we can take this into an example, of course, the what we do know of the attack that occurred against Empire Group, and sort of the impacts it had on their ability to do automated inventory and ordering, to calculate staff hours and ensure payment. You know, and they demonstrated some resiliency in their ability to stay operational throughout that crisis. And I think that's a word that Daniel mentions, and I think it's really important, is about resiliency. And then we think about the sensitive kind of information that can cause the most harm or impact. So health information is very high on that list. We see other sensitive company information, the ability to operate your business, to invoice customers, which is at the heart of the Colonial Pipeline breach. Was, you know, of course, this was an attention-grabbing attack that affected a major portion of the U.S. Northeast liquefied fuel pipelines, but it wasn't the infrastructure that went down, it was the billing system. So that's what got encrypted. So I've seen everything from pet food production company getting hit with ransomware and unable to actually run its production line, to the stories that we see in the headlines every day. In short, every business that depends on their technology to scale or run their organization is potentially susceptible and vulnerable to the impact of extortion via ransomware. And that's so just the reality of it.
Because, you know, as food companies, we so much of what is in a grocery store, like the Empire Group Sobe stores and other banners, or within a food manufacturing environment, you know, it has to be used within a specific amount of time while it's still delicious and safe. So I guess that would be one reason why ransomware would be particularly effective against food businesses, because if you have product that's going bad, you know, you might be able to say, oh, we'll catch up on our billing, you know, our invoices are big enough that we've got the cash flow or something. But But yeah, when you literally have your fridge is not working and the milk is spoiling, that's pretty intense. Is that something that a ransomware wrongdoer or whatever we want to call them? I almost call them a ransomware business owner, but anyhow, do they actually get that granular in their thinking when they're choosing targets?
So, and Daniel can probably add to this context as well, but the experience that I have seen, the research that I've done, the frontline experience, you aren't wrong to describe them as a business. This is actually a multiple layer business. You have the ransomware as a service operators who build, scale, and maintain the cloud criminal infrastructure tooling, customer support, marketing of these products and services. Then you've got their affiliates, their franchisees, who buy into these different brands to access these services and take a cut or margin off of these sales. So I think it's really important for our business owners in food innovation to know they face unscrupulous criminal business owners, oftentimes with either the tacit approval of a nation state or certainly may be run by nation states now to make money for that nation state. This is big business, and they get to know their verticals, their industries, their sectors, and they will work them. It wasn't a coincidence that after the University of Calgary incident in, I think that was 2016, we saw at my university when I was running the security program, malicious attacks with malware go from 120,000 hitting our perimeter a month to 1.2 million. Once they figure out there's a vertical, they can pay, they understand the business of it, and even they will get to know your business in an intimate way. There's numerous documented cases in retail and more. The attackers will get inside of your IT environment, and they don't just pull the trigger immediately. They hang around. They go looking for your insurance policy. They go looking at your balance sheet, your profit loss, and they develop a pricing strategy to be as smart as possible to guarantee the most likelihood of payment that you're willing to do. So they start their negotiations from a very interesting position of strength, and that's what you're up against.
Wow. Okay. So Daniel, I'm sure you have lots of follow-ups from that discussion that David and I just had. I think I'll just give you the floor to comment as you like.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear David explaining it, and it's really, this is a business. It's how maximize profit with the least investment possible and the less risk possible for them. So that's the business they're in. Quite often, and as David explained, they want to go to those area where they know the pressure to pay the ransom is so great that it would be, they expect it, right? You know, and they, as David said, they're going to go through they already start knowing what your insurance policy, if you have a cyber insurance policy, they already know quite often how much your coverage is. So they're going to ask for that price. So because they know then, no, that's okay. That's part of the business. They already factor that in their business model, and away we go. You pay. So absolutely there. Maybe what I can share that sometimes we think as those cyber criminal as being extremely well. There's the picture of the teenager working in the basement of his parents' home, so that's still there. But we also sometimes foresee those complex cybercrime group working in Eastern Europe somewhere that just reach out and do these things. But with the ransomware as a service model, where a lot of the cybercrime are willing to provide all the infrastructure to a criminal to do the last mile to actually do the crime. And I just want to highlight then recently there was a next federal public servant that got arrested for been running a ransomware crime. He was actually arrested in the U.S., but was a resident of the Ottawa-Gatineau area. Ex-federal servant. He was actually somebody that had a prior career in the drug business. And I guess
like the legitimate pharmaceutical business, not like a drug trafficker.
No, drug trafficker.
No, he was. So he was a lifelong criminal. Gotcha. Okay. Exactly.
Well, with a normal career, but on the side, it was, dealing drugs. Got arrested, did a bit of time for that, realized that this was too risky, and then he decided to become a cyber criminal and go in the ransomware business.
Wow.
And I'm telling that story to show how easy it is. And more on if you look at go in the media and look at the person, this is not a geek. The guy is not when you're looking at the
Yeah.
person there, not a geek. The guy
He doesn't have a data science degree and a lot of technical knowledge. So it's pretty simple to get into this kind of thing. It's very interesting. So, you know, now that we've made everyone viewing understand how big the problem is, I think they probably all want to know what is it they should look for. Like, how do you know if someone's trying to get into your system? So, yeah, Daniel, I guess, you know, maybe if you can tell us from your experience, what do you see when things are reported? How do these ransomwares get into particular business systems?
It's the usual technique. So it's going to be back to the people, the personal aspect of cybersecurity, of cybercrime. They're going to use, quite often they're focusing on social reality of individual to get them to actually click on something or do so. So they're going to either through phishing, you know, sending email, getting an employee to click, like sending an email that sometime will do just normal business. You know, you're going to a conference, they're going to send an email which is going to have the conference logo and everything else, and just get the employee to click on something. Like, you know, click on a link. Oh, please, there's a new conference agenda. Click in this thing. So, or open an attachment, right? Or they're going to or force you to go to a different website so that by going to this website, then you get infected. So it's the same technique that are quite familiar, that typically any company that has a employee awareness IT security program will try to teach employee not to be careful and be mindful of those things and looking for those clues that this might actually be a false attempt, right? A false
right. So just on a super granular level, let's just like map out a use case. I'm sitting at my desk typing away, up pops my email alert, and it looks like it's a note from, I don't know, somebody I do business with all the time, or at least a company I do business with all the time. I click on it, and then in clicking on that link, that's what releases this malware into my system. Is that how it's transmitted?
Yeah, well, typically the usual model is step one will be to get an entry into, it will be to download a portion of a software that would just establish a presence on your network. Then that software will then download further capability, right? Like the initial package is only about establishing a presence. And then after that, that software will then download more component to be able then to move laterally to do search, file search on your on your machine, on the systems, and try to establish a presence. And then after that, in the third stage, that's when they'll download the malware that will actually start encrypting, for example, the data, or even extracting, because we keep talking about ransomware where they're going to encrypt the data on your system to prevent you to access them. But there's also, quite often, it's actually a two-stage step. Like first, they're actually going to download all the kind of sensitive information that a business might have. They're going to keep a copy for themselves, then encrypt your data, which allow them to do the double extortion process where on one end, they're going to, if you don't pay, part of the motivation for paying is that they're going to release all that data information publicly. But even if you pay, then you're always at the mercy. They're going to come back a few months later because they have a copy of your information. So they ask you to pay again, right? So that's part of the model.
Interesting. So I could imagine that very high net worth individuals are probably targets for this kind of thing too, because they, would probably be able to extract money from keeping their personal business out of the news. So it's interesting to see how this works. And I had been, going to ask you, David, about whether or not folks were in this ransomware business were trying to get their hands on digital assets and information. And it sounds like they are. We hadn't talked about this question before, but what's the best way to keep very sensitive information, as sort of, I guess, a double lock system? Should you have your most sensitive information within your organization be password protected, or can they just hack through that kind of thing?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about passwords because, Daniel's given the great use case of you get the phishing email, you get a link, and it's linked to maybe an unknown piece of malware, and it executes in your browser, gets some persistent, and moves on. That's one way things happen. The other way that it happens is literally you could land at a landing page, say you're using Office 365, and it looks just like the Office 365 landing page. And I got an alert. It looked like it was my thing saying an email's been held up and it's in quarantine, and I'm busy. I got to get this done. And so you just go and you quickly log in. And for the savvy in the audience, they may be thinking right now at this moment, yes, David, but our team has been trained to think about multi-factor authentication. And
Yes.
even if they captured the username and password, they would need to get that token. And we've now seen criminal toolkits that literally have operators standing by live so they can try and capture this in real time, where they'll use the password, the username, and then, of course, they'll get their multi-factor authentication challenge screen to enter their code, and they're going to try and time it to get within that. Or, as has been the case in several high-profile breaches, they'll get the username and password, and then what will happen is you'll have the multi-factor authentication with what's known as push notification. So you can send alerts to someone and they can approve it from their watch, their phone, etc. And the kids from Lapsus from the UK and South America, they got really good at bombing out people's phones once they had a username and password until they just got capitulated and someone in the household clicked the approve on the phone and they're in. So in that scenario, once you're a credentialed privileged user, you can start
do whatever you want in the background.
All kinds of chaos. So that's phishing is a really easy and effective way, as Daniel said, to use social engineering to manipulate people with tons of lures. And I'm in the business of phishing. We send now something on the order of 3 to 5 million phishes per year out. We've got a ton of aggregate data. I can tell you that anybody on the bad day or a good day can fall victim to phishing at the wrong time.
It's when you're busy. We use your business as probably Dan knows, but our viewers don't, to train CFIN employees. And every time you get me with one of your test messages, it's when I'm super busy, and it's usually when I'm on my phone. It's rarely when I'm using my laptop, because I'm in a slightly different type of focus, I think, then. And I'm at the point now where when you catch me, I kick myself because I'm like, oh, darn, that David Shipley, he's tricked me again. But I guess we also should explain that the reason you're sending out phishing is for training purposes. You're not actually a ransomware practitioner. So
still on the side of good. So education can make a huge difference. So we know, and we've done tons of research, others in our field have done tons of research. If you aren't educating your team, 30 to 35% of people will fall victim to a phishing email. That's high.
30 to 35%.
30 to 35.
Okay.
Within 90 days, if you do a training program, the way that we've approached it, which is education first, teach people the rules of the game, and give them a chance to win by reporting the emails, you can actually lower that to less than 5%. So it's about an 80 to 90% reduction in that risk. This isn't a silver bullet. And I think that's an important message that I'm going to put forward. None of the solutions we're going to talk about to make you more resilient to ransomware on their own are going to be like one and done. Hey, well, David, I trained my people. Why did I still have a ransomware incident? Well, were you patching all of your internet-facing systems? Did you have a
What
disaster?
does that mean, patching your internet-facing systems? I'm not familiar with that.
Right. So this is the other common way that we have seen customers and clients on their recovery stages. They have whether it's Microsoft Exchange servers that didn't have the right security updates on them, whether it was internet-enabled facing devices for remote work. And we've seen clients who in the pandemic set up remote access because that's how it was part of their business continuity, but it wasn't properly secured. And oh boy, that's an easy way for organizations to break in. So those are some other examples of things you have to think of. But your point, lastly, about data, it really is important. And Daniel mentioned this in another conversation, and I'll bring it back to the Colonial Pipeline. Understanding as a business owner what actually is the critical data, that without that data, you can't run your business. So in the Colonial Pipeline example, the billing information was absolutely critical. They could move product from a source to an end retailer, no problem. But because they didn't know who put what in or who took it out, they couldn't run the pipeline. And so it's really important to understand what's critical to our business. And many business leaders don't realize you can't tell your IT team to do that. They don't know your business as well as the actual managers, owners, leaders, etc. understand it. So that's the part of the people side too, is what am I actually responsible to as business owner?
That's really interesting. I love to take that back to Dan. So you explained how the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity works. You're dealing with attacks and you're learning from what's happening right in the moment to Canada's important online assets and infrastructure, and then you're figuring out how to maneuver around that piece. But when you go to help others, like citizens and businesses, you obviously, as a government agency, you have specific information to how you were attacked, and you know how to protect what's important to you. But it must be difficult to deal with individual situations because they'll all be very different, I suppose.
Absolutely. So the way we do this, and of course, when I say we assist, we don't go individually with every company because we cannot scale up to that level. But what we do, we try to put out there the information, create the community of interest so that we can share our knowledge and our recommendation. And maybe what I can, first of all, I'm just going to pick it up on a couple of points David made.
Sure thing.
On ransomware, first of all, it's a defense in depth. You're asking, how do you protect yourself from ransomware? So it's not one thing, it's many things. Some of it are, there's a proper sound segmented architecture, some of the right cybersecurity device, firewall, multi-factor authentication. I don't want to go into the listing of those, but there's a lot of that. But there's also be ready to respond. You need to respond to an attack, because the faster you respond, then you minimize, you're limiting the impact, right? So it's about incident response team. It's about who's on your incident response team. Bring in the right people, because again, as David explained, ransomware is a business issue, right? That start at the top of the company. So how much risk are you willing to accept? What are the key data that you need to run your company, run your system? And so you need a whole of business kind of answer to that, right? So your incident response plan is about making sure that folks in authority are sensitized to those issues, understand what are the key factors they need to consider so they can make the proper decision. It's about the IT people, the cybersecurity people, the system operator, the business owner of application to be together to understand what they need to do to minimize the impact. So those kind of principles we try to teach or try to communicate as much as we can. And maybe if I can, we're a public organization, so we get no credit out of that, but we did produce what we call a ransomware playbook. That's amazing. Which is available on our website, and I would highly recommend people. It's a management document, just to be clear, not a technical document, but it's written for management, and it's about. There's really two parts in the books. Part one is how to prepare yourself to be able to sustain a ransomware incident in your organization. So it's about all the resilience that you did prior to incident, and then part two is actually how do you respond and recover. So you come into work, open up your computer, and bang, there's you get the message from a cyber criminal that your system is being hacked, and here's how much you blah blah blah, contact us to get access to your data. Well, that gives you a bit of an action plan, an incident response plan, how to go through the process to go through that unfortunate event that you need to go through. So I highly recommend you look at it. It's a management document, and then it gives you some area to focus. And then this is where, a business can hire some expert, like David and some of those people to guide you to that process to build those systems.
Same way you hire a PR company to get you ready for other types of crisis management. I'm sure they would have a role in this too. That's an amazing takeaway, and we'll make sure that we find a way to share the link to that playbook with all of our CFIN members. So David, we're coming up near the end of our time together. And I know that you have the same way that Daniel just talked to us about having this planned response as his big call to action. I know you have one as well. And I'd love to give you a couple minutes to share what you think we should all do as soon as this webinar is over.
Perfect. And I think I'm going to pick it up where Daniel had about incident response. And I'll start with the leadership side. Have a tabletop exercise. Get every your leaders in a room, have your IT manager, and it's great if you can bring in a professional to do this, but even if you can't, you can still do this yourselves. And ask yourself the question, I just got ransomware. What do we do? Who do we call? Do we have insurance? Will we pay the insurance? Give yourself some scenarios. From that actual conversation will come a ton of questions. You won't have it all figured out. We do tabletops twice a year, and our security officer is brilliant.
For your own business, you
for our own business, and every single time the goal is to not be perfect, give the perfect answer. It's to think through the process and find the gaps and improve things. Mm-hmm. From that conversation on the tabletop, you'll start building out your incident response plans and procedures. And what's really important here is practicing them. It's no good having a fire drill plan and never doing a fire drill. You've got to make sure that you actually know how it's all supposed to come together. Practice, practice, practice. Now, some businesses can do this once a year. Some can do it like mine twice a year. You have to decide how sensitive this threat is to your business against all the other risks. That's really important. When you've done your tabletop and your incident response plan, you then get a better sense for what to actually invest in. And here are some quick wins. Obviously, I'm going to tell you, educate and train your people. Fastest, quickest way to lower the single largest risk. About 82% of malicious cyber events start with people. So start there. It's a quick win. Daniel's mentioned briefly some really good technology controls. And then when you've educated the driver and you're doing the best you can, then the other safety systems that we expect to work, like seat belts, airbags, lane assist, etc., they've got a much better chance of keeping someone safe if we've got a good driver behind the wheel to start with. But you still need those safety systems. Multi-factor authentication is huge. If you have multi-factor authentication, consider upping your game away from push notifications to using new features like number matching, which are more resilient to those brute force sort of trying to get someone to capitulate kind of attacks. The next on my list, password manager tools. Most people now deal with 50 plus sites, and we've got data from tens of thousands of people. We'll be publishing a report at the end of January. And the two top answers to the question of how do I manage my password is number one, I just remember them, which means they're using the same password. Or number two, I use a pattern only I know, which means they're reusing passwords. That's 56% plus of respondents usually. Only about 20% of people are using a password manager. And if you're super paranoid like I am, I keep my Government of Canada password, my Beauceron password, and my banking password in the number one lockbox in my head. That's 3 passwords I've got to remember. And then I've got my master password for my password manager. And then all the other sites that I have are carefully managed. So my bias is I'm focusing on the people side. If you're not doing that, if you're doing that, multi-factor authentication, and to give you a sense of a win with that multi-factor authentication, that can reduce your risk to brute force attacks by 99%.
That's
not perfect, but boy, does that take a dent out of the easy automated digital lockpicking. And then if you can make your users resilient, not just giving them security awareness training and telling them to do something, but giving them the tools to make it easier for them to do the right thing, i.e. password managers, you can put a big dent in that risk as well. Those are some easy, quick wins. But lastly, to Dan's point, it's about a layered defense. So the technology controls, working alongside the educated people with a practice plan. And oh, by the way, last note, there was a study that just came out last week, and I was talking to IT World Canada about this one, blew my mind. Rising number of people have actually tried to test their backups, and it's not working. The time to test your backup is not during a ransomware incident. Test those backups frequently.
All right, and on that point, we are going to close it out. But thank you so much. For those of you watching, just when we quit talking, don't worry, there's going to be a little bit more information on some slides. It's going to help you to connect to some of the resources we've talked about. And there'll also be information about webinar number 3 coming soon to a CFIN Yodel channel near you. So thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, David. I feel better knowing that you guys are out there doing your good work, and I'm going to try and be much more vigilant. And my New Year's resolution for 2023 is that I will not fall victim to any David Shipley Beauceron phishing tests. So thanks very much, guys. It was I've learned a lot, and I think others will learn a lot from this webinar too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.